The mountains didn't look like mountains in daylight. They looked like blank paper, white slopes, white sky, white glare, everything bleached until distance and depth became guesses. The pass ahead was a thin gray scar between two ridge lines. The only color came from the convoy itself. Two armored trucks, a battered med-evac van with a red cross painted on its sides, and a dusting of snow that clung to every seam like frostbite. The convoy moved slow on purpose. On these roads, speed wasn't bravery. Speed was a way to die without knowing why. Staff Sergeant Kellen Rourke, security element lead, sat forward in the passenger seat of the lead truck, chin tucked, eyes scanning the pass like it might blink. Beside him, the driver kept both hands locked at 10 and 2, shoulders stiff beneath a heavy parka. Behind them, the second truck carried a belt-fed gun on a roof mount, and behind that the med van carried blood bags, antibiotics, and one sealed hard case strapped down like it was more delicate than the wounded men in back. The hospital outpost was only a few miles behind them, tucked into a cold valley with a helipad scraped clean. That should have meant safety. It didn't. This route had a reputation. A long, shallow bowl. Open snowfield in the middle, rock shells on both sides, where anyone with patience could see you coming for a full minute before you saw them at all. Rourke had asked for overwatch on the ridge. He'd been promised it. Keep it tight, he murmured, more to himself than the driver. Eyes on the bends. The lead vehicle rounded the last curve and then stopped so cleanly it felt like a drill. No squeal, no skid, just brakes and a controlled halt. The driver exhaled. That wasn't here. Rourke leaned forward. Across the road lay debris, a small avalanche of broken rock and snapped timber, thrown together with the lazy shape of something designed to look accidental. It hadn't been there an hour ago. He would have remembered. The pass didn't offer many landmarks. You memorized whatever you could. Reverse, the driver asked. Rourke's eyes went left, right, then far ahead. Too open, too quiet. The kind of quiet that had edges. Hold, Rourke said. He grabbed his handset. Convoy lead to ridge, confirm eyes on. The radio replied with a single dry hiss, like a snake in the snow. Then the signal chopped. Then it vanished. Rourke tapped the side, harder. Ridge, talk to me. Nothing. In the med van, the medic sergeant, Holt, held his own handset up, watching its tiny lights flicker like a dying candle. He mouthed one word through the windshield at Rourke. Jammed. The air changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling like the snowfield itself leaned in. The first shot struck the lead truck's windshield dead center, punching a spiderweb of cracks. The second snapped into the engine compartment with the metallic thunk of a hammer on thick steel. No wild spray. No panic. Disciplined. The driver flinched, but didn't scream. Rourke swore once, low, and shoved open his door. Dismount, he shouted. Dismount, dismount. Doors flew open. Boots hit snow. Men fanned out and immediately found the truth. There was nowhere to go. The bowl was wrong geometry. Low ground. Sparse cover. Snow berms that looked sturdy but collapsed under bullets as if they were made of powdered glass. On the second truck, the turret gunner tried to swing the roof mount toward the ridgeline. A shot cracked, and the gunner jerked back, hand clapping his shoulder. He fell out of view, rolling onto the roof with a stunned, tight gasp. Rourke dropped behind the lead truck's front tire and looked up. High ground on both sides. 2 firing positions at least. Maybe more. Whoever set this had done their homework. They weren't firing to kill quickly. They were firing to pin, to shape, to force the convoy to sit right where it was. In the snow near the med van, Corporal Vance was down. A dark stain spread beneath him, shockingly vivid against white. He tried to press his glove hand to his thigh, but his fingers kept slipping. His face had gone pale under windburn. Holt crouched behind the med van's rear wheel, staring at him like a man staring at a burning room. I can't reach him, Holt said, voice tight. Rourke looked at the distance. 15 meters of open snow. 15 meters of certain attention. Smoke, he asked. A soldier shook his head and held up a pouch. 2 canisters, that's all. Routine, run loadout. Not a sustained fight. Rourke lifted his head just enough to scan the ridge where Overwatch was supposed to be. Silent. No friendly crack. No movement. No signal. Either Overwatch had been chased off, pinned down, or never existed beyond someone's promise. Rourke's stomach sank. They were alone. A new sound threaded through the gunfire. Heavier, slower, purposeful. Rounds walked along the convoy's line, like someone drawing a ruler across metal. A heavy weapon team, machine gun or a spotter setting up for something worse, was laying down pressure, freezing the convoy in place. Rourke raised his hand and signaled, 2 fingers out, then down, then sweep, stay low, hold positions. Protocol without comms. The kind of clean motions soldiers made when the world was too loud for words. The enemy tightened the ring with calm intent. Shots came in pairs, then a pause, then pairs again like breathing. And then 3 cracks, different from the rest. Farther, flatter, not the sharp, frantic snap of rifles in the bowl. These were clean, confident, almost bored. An enemy radio operator stood up on the left shelf, hand near his chest rig, trying to adjust something. His head snapped sideways, and he dropped like his strings had been cut. A second later, an RPG gunner, half crouched behind a rock, jerked backward as if punched in the sternum. The rocket tube slid off his shoulder and thumped into snow. A third crack, and a squad leader mid-gesture, arm raised, mouth open, folded into himself, and went down. Friendly soldiers froze for a half second, stunned. Rourke's eyes went hunting. No muzzle flash, no obvious perch. The shots had come from an angle that shouldn't exist, not from the ridges where anyone sensible would post. It felt like the bullets had arrived out of the glare itself. On the opposite shelf, the enemy hesitated. Their fire stuttered. Heads turned, scanning the wrong ridgeline, rifles probing empty snow. The unseen shooter was already shifting priorities. Vance's bleeding didn't stop because help reached him. It slowed because pressure broke, because the enemy paused, confused, and confusion bought time the way armor never could. Rourke crouched lower, heart punching at his ribs. Somebody out there, had just saved them, and nobody knew who. Earlier that day, the field hospital looked like a small, stubborn city built from canvas and grit. Snow walls had been shoveled up around tents to block wind. Generators hummed behind a tarp barrier. A helipad had been scraped down to hard ice, its edges marked with orange panels that flapped in gusts. Everything smelled like fuel, disinfectant, and cold metal. Inside, it was warmer, barely. The trauma bay lights were bright and clinical, casting everything in stark detail. The rows of cots, the stacks of gauze, the stainless steel that never looked fully clean no matter how hard you scrubbed. A night shift janitor moved through the corridors with a mop bucket and a ring of keys that chimed softly when she walked. Her name on the roster was Mara Voss. Her job title was facility support. Most people called her the janitor like it was one word and one idea. She didn't talk much, and in a place where every reminder of life came with a scream or a groan, quiet was easy to ignore. Soldiers stepped around her wet floor signs without noticing her face. Medics nodded automatically. The hospital commander barely registered her presence unless a light went out. But Mara noticed everything. She paused near the entrance where the snow had been tracked in and studied the boot prints like a page. Heavy tread, fresh. One pattern from the security element. Another from nurses. A third, thin and tight, unfamiliar, leading toward the calm shelter and then disappearing, as if someone had changed shoes or stepped carefully to avoid leaving tracks. She moved on, dipping her mop, wringing it out with steady hands. Outside, wind teased spindrift off the snow walls in thin veils. Mara watched the veils drift and estimated direction and strength without thinking. A shift in wind meant smoke wouldn't hold. It meant sound would carry differently. It meant the ridge would either reveal you or hide you, depending on timing. In the trauma bay, a surgeon and 2 nurses prepared for an incoming casualty wave, routine in a place where routine meant blood. They checked oxygen bottles, laid out tourniquets, counted bags. Mara disinfected surfaces with obsessive precision. Not fast, thorough, like a person who understood exactly how many ways a small mistake could end a life. A junior lieutenant, new enough to still have edges on his confidence, spotted her lingering near the operations corner where a map board had been set up. "Staff only," he snapped, gesturing with a gloved hand as if shooing a stray dog. Mara glanced up. Her eyes were calm, not apologetic. She nodded once and kept cleaning, unoffended, as if he'd told her the weather. At the map board, the convoy mission briefing was underway. Blood and antibiotics were being loaded into the med-evac van. A compact hard case, sealed, tagged, and handcuffed to a steel frame, was being treated like it weighed more than the rest of the supplies combined. A comms tech spoke quietly to the commander. Sensor sight sent it down at dawn. "They want it moved today." "What is it?" the lieutenant asked. "Not your lane," the commander said, tired. "Just know it matters." Mara pushed her mop past the doorway, head down, listening without listening. The words slid into place on their own. A data drive, something tied to a sensor site, meant patterns. It meant eyes in the mountains. It meant someone had information that could either save convoys or get them slaughtered. Last week, intercepted chatter had mentioned a daylight test. The base's comms had been weird at the edges, little dropouts, odd static, the kind of small anomalies people explain away because they were busy surviving. Mara did not explain them away. Her gaze lifted to the route line on the map board, a thin marker through the mountain pass. The long, shallow bowl. Her fingers tightened slightly on the mop handle. Not fear. Recognition. A medic walking by. Holt gave her a half grin. "You're invisible, you know that?" Mara's mouth twitched into the faintest smile. Invisibility wasn't an insult to her. It was a skill, a shield, a way to do what needed doing without becoming a story. Later, under the guise of cleaning, she checked the storeroom. The locked cabinet in the back wasn't on the official inventory list. It sat behind boxes of saline and spare 4 lines. The lock was old, scratched around the edges as if a key had been used too often, too quickly. Mara opened it with a key that wasn't supposed to exist on a janitor's ring. Inside was a battered long case and a small medical pouch. The pouch was labeled with faded black marker. Old habit, old handwriting. Range cards were tucked behind it like receipts. Mara closed the cabinet again and returned the key ring to her pocket, calm as ever. In a private sink area, she washed her hands longer than necessary. Water ran cold over her skin. When she reached for a towel, her sleeve rode up and a scar at her wrist flashed, thin, surgical old. She pulled her cuff down without looking, as if hiding it from the air itself. The commander held a brief address near the helipad. "No heroics," he said. "We are a medical sanctuary. We do not escalate. We do not turn this place into a battlefield. We maintain protocol." Everyone nodded because nodding was easier than arguing. Mara stepped outside afterward. She looked up at the ridgeline and then across the valley, eyes tracking wind and shadow. Then she looked at the helipad clock and saw time as a physical thing, a shrinking window. The first distant pops echoed from the pass a while later, soft at first, then sharper, then urgent. The base radios stuttered. A comms tech frowned, tapped equipment, frowned harder. Mara froze for half a second. Then she set her mop against the wall like it had never been her real tool. And she moved. Back in the bowl, the fight stopped being a fight and became a problem with teeth. The enemy tightened control with intent. Their fire came from staggered positions. 2 main shelves, maybe a third hidden by glare. A maneuver element used snowdrifts and rock folds to advance in short bursts, always moving when friendly heads were down, always halting when friendly rifles tried to track them. Constraint 1. Communications were dead. No radio. No satellite ping. No drone feed. The convoy was blind and mute beyond hand signals and shouted guesses. Constraint 2. Terrain was against them. They sat low in a shallow bowl while the enemy looked down on them from high ground with clean lines and crossfire. Every move was visible. Every silhouette was an invitation. Constraint 3. Casualties. Vance bled through his trousers, the stains spreading despite his hand pressure. The turret gunner on the second truck clung to his shoulder with a grimace, trying to stay conscious. The med van's driver sat slumped behind the wheel, concussed and glassy-eyed, responding a beat too slow to commands. Constraint 4. Ammo. This was supposed to be routine. A supply run. A quick turn. They carried what they always carried. Enough for trouble, not enough for war. A belt-fed gun tried to suppress the left shelf and quickly began to overheat, the barrel smoking faintly in the cold. Constraint 5 time. A helicopter could land at the hospital helipad only within a tight window before weather and fuel limits made it impossible. That window was bleeding away minute by minute, and every minute lost here would be paid for in blood later. Constraint 6. Morality. This route fed a medical facility. Stray rounds could hit unarmed staff vehicles. Smoke could obscure the approach lane. The enemy knew it. They positioned their fire so returning shots would risk collateral. Rourke crouched behind the lead truck and watched the enemy's behavior. They weren't rushing to wipe them out. They were shaping them, immobilizing the vehicles, separating the wounded, forcing the convoy to stay in the open while the enemy took their time. A capture, propaganda, or worse. He saw an RPG team probe for vehicle kills, moving carefully, not shooting yet, waiting for the right moment. A spotter low, clever, pointed, then ducked, then pointed again. And somewhere above, close enough that the sound carried faintly through wind, a calm voice coordinated in clipped phrases. Not a raider. Trained. Rourke tried doctrine. Smoke, he shouted. 2 canisters popped, coughing gray into the cold air. For a second, it looked promising. Then the wind sheared it thin across the snow like a ragged scarf. It provided partial cover, enough to hide a hand, not a man. A young soldier, Adams, looked at Vance and made the decision anyway. He lowered his head and sprinted. Rounds stitched the snow in front of his boots. Not hitting him, not yet, warning shots with precision. Hurting him back. The message was clear. Move when we allow it, not when you want. Adams skidded, dropped flat, and crawled back, jaw clenched. The lead truck's engine coughed, cold, stressed, wounded by earlier shots. The driver tried to restart it after a brief attempt to creep forward, and the battery died with a final unwilling click. Mechanical failure. Another nail. They couldn't reposition even if they found the courage. Rourke looked at the sealed hard case strapped inside the med van. He couldn't see it from where he was, but he could feel its presence like a weight. Option, Holt said, voice strained. We ditch the case, we run. Rourke stared at the open bowl. Running meant crossing exposed snow under crossfire. Running meant leaving the wounded. Running meant the enemy getting exactly what they wanted if their goal was the case and prisoners. The enemy began a completion move. A flanking element started down the right side, using rock shelves like steps, closing the distance to seal the bowl. If they got close enough, it wouldn't be a firefight anymore. It would be hands on throats. Rourke locked eyes with Holt, the medic, across the thin strip of smoke. It was a silent admission. They were about to be overrun. And then, another clean, impossible shot. The flank leader, mid-step, jerked and fell sideways into a drift, rolling awkwardly, rifle clattering. The flanking element halted, suddenly unsure. Rourke's heart stuttered. That shooter wasn't random. That shooter was choosing targets like a strategist. Whoever it was, they understood the geometry better than anyone in the bowl, and they were trying to keep the convoy alive. At the hospital outpost, the mood shifted from routine emergency to something worse, uncertainty. Staff moved faster, voices louder. A nurse ran with a clipboard. A comms tech swore and slapped a panel. The commander stepped outside and listened, face tightening as the distant gunfire sharpened. Lock down, he ordered. Medical neutrality. Everyone inside. No exceptions. People obeyed because they believed rules could protect them. Mara moved against the flow. She didn't argue. She didn't announce herself. She simply walked with purpose toward the storeroom, boots quiet on packed snow. She grabbed a cold weather pack and a battered long case. In the supply tent, she made small adjustments with practiced hands, swapped thick glove for thinner liners for dexterity, taped a loose strap that could slap against fabric and give away position, checked a simple optic, then paused and replaced a dead battery with one she'd already warmed inside her pocket. She passed the trauma bay. A surgeon stepped out, eyes wide. We're short hands. If this turns into a mass casualty. Mara didn't stop fully, but she met his gaze. Prep extra suction. Put a warming blanket under the first casualty you think you don't have time for. Hypothermia, kills quietly. It wasn't a janitor's advice. The surgeon blinked once, then nodded sharply, as if something in her tone had flipped a switch in his brain. Mara moved on. Behind the outpost, past the generator tarp, a maintenance ladder ran up the back of a storage container to a service cut in the slope. It wasn't a route anyone used unless they had to. It was exposed, narrow and slick with ice. Mara climbed it anyway. Daylight snow was deceptive. It made the world bright enough to hurt, but it also flattened shadows and hid movement if you knew how to use timing. Mara waited for gusts that lifted spindrift and blurred edges, then moved in those moments, her body becoming another shifting patch of white. The service cut led to a narrow snow shelf that locals avoided. It hugged the mountain's side above the bowl. Not the ridgeline where everyone expected Overwatch, but a seam beneath it. Exposed, yes, but invisible from below because of angle and glare. Mara's lungs burned, not from panic, but from altitude and cold. She kept her mouth closed to control breath, to prevent the fog plume that could betray her. Halfway along, she found evidence that turned suspicion into certainty. A cut length of comms cable, freshly severed, tucked under a rock. Boot prints that didn't match local militia, tread too uniform, too new. A disguised antenna stump, sprayed white and wedged into a crevice like someone wanted it to look like a broken branch. Preparation. Planning. Not an ambush of opportunity. Visibility began to collapse in intermittent waves, spindrift sweeping across the shelf. Not a full storm, but enough to erase details. A person who rushed would slip, fall, or show themselves in movement. Mara did not rush. She paused behind a rock outcrop and treated herself like a patient. 2 fingers to her neck, counting pulse. Slow inhale, slow exhale. She acknowledged the tremor in her hands. Not fear disappearing, but fear managed. Function chosen. She opened the battered long case. Inside lay a precision rifle with worn edges, the kind of wear that came from years of being carried, used, cleaned, and carried again. Beside it, a small medical pouch sat snug in foam cutouts. A healer and a hunter in the same box. Mara assembled the rifle with quiet efficiency. No flourish, no reverence. Tools were tools. The difference was what you did with them. She crawled the last few meters to a rock crest and scraped a shallow hide in the snow behind it, using her forearm and a small folding shovel. She anchored the rifle on her pack. Face wrapped against frost, I pressed the glass. The bowl lay below like a frozen amphitheater. Vehicles clustered near the roadblock. Friendly soldiers pinned behind tires and metal. Enemy positions on shelves, moving with confidence. Mara didn't start by shooting at the loudest gun. She searched for the brain. Where did enemy teams glance before they moved? Where did gestures point? Where did coordination tighten? Her eyes found it. A small team near a rocky spur with an antenna arrangement tucked low. A jammer. They weren't blasting the entire spectrum indiscriminately. They were choking the convoy's lifeline just enough to keep them isolated. Mara adjusted for wind, small in daylight, but never zero. She adjusted for glare, which could shift perception. She waited for a moment when a medical transport on the far road, an unarmed vehicle returning to the hospital, passed through the background of her sight line. She refused the shot. Moral constraint. Even here, even now, she waited until the transport cleared and the background became clean. Then she exhaled into the cold. Her first official shot was simple. The jammer guard, standing slightly apart, rifle down, confident, collapsed without theatrics, as if his knees forgot how to work. Mara didn't watch him fall. She shifted her attention to the next piece of the machine, because saving lives at range wasn't about anger. It was about timing. In the bowl, Rourke felt the air change again, not quieter but less controlled. His radio didn't come back fully. It fluttered in fragments, like a voice trying to speak through water. Lead, a burst of static, then copy, then nothing. But it was enough to prove the jam was weakening. Rourke glanced up, searching the ridgeline again. Still no friendly Overwatch where it was supposed to be, which meant their help was coming from somewhere else. Above, Mara built a target ladder in her mind the way a surgeon built a plan before cutting skin. Force multipliers first, not because they deserved it more, because stopping them stopped everything. First, radio operators and relay runners coordinating the ring. She spotted one, a man hunched behind a rock, hand to his chest rig, speaking into a mic with the posture of a person who believed the world listened. Mara waited through a long silence, letting him talk, letting him expose himself to his own habits. Then one shot. He dropped. The mic cord snapped taut, then went slack. Second, RPG teams threatening vehicles and medics. An RPG gunner shifted position, creeping toward a better angle on the med van. He moved with care, trusting cover that was only cover from below. Mara adjusted and fired. He fell backward into snow, rocket tube, sliding away like something ashamed to be seen. Third, squad leaders controlling maneuver. A leader stood briefly, arm raised, directing the flanking element with a sharp gesture. Mara's shot was quick and clean. He folded mid-gesture, and the flanking element hesitated, suddenly without a hand to follow. Fourth, crew served weapon lead, the one walking fire along the vehicles. The gun itself was hidden behind a rock fold, but the pattern of rounds told her where the barrel must be, and the spotter's head popped up in predictable rhythm to correct aim. Mara waited for the head. One shot. The head didn't pop up again. Below, friendly soldiers felt the pressure loosen like a knot slipping. Rourke didn't waste the opening. "Move, Vance," he shouted, waving two men forward with sharp hand signals. Adams and another soldier sprinted low. Rounds snapped around them, enemy fire returning, but less precise, less confident. They reached Vance, hooked arms under his shoulders, and dragged it behind the med van's rear wheel. Holt was already there, hands shaking as he tore open a tourniquet. "Hold still." Holt snapped, moored himself in Vance. He cinched the strap tight. Vance screamed once, then bit down hard, eyes wide with the shock of pain and relief. Mara watched and felt a strange flicker in her chest. Not pride, not satisfaction. Recognition of the smallest victory. Time bought. Ammo constraints peaked below. Friendly rifles dipped into partial magazines. The belt-fed gun smoked and then stopped as the gunner swapped a barrel with trembling hands. They needed extraction now, not later. The enemy realized what was happening. It didn't take them long. People who planned daylight ambushes didn't stay confused for long. They shifted tactics with professional speed. Smoke pots tossed, staggered movement, teams moving in pairs instead of clusters. A counter-hunt element began climbing toward Mara's seam route, using rocks as steps, eyes scanning for the line of death. And then a new threat arrived with an ugly little buzz. A small drone, cheap, plastic, effective, rose from behind a shelf and skimmed low against the glare. It wasn't there to shoot. It was there to see, to find muzzle flash, to find movement, to turn her hide into coordinates. Mara's optic fogged at the edges from breath and cold. She felt the world soften around the sight picture. She wiped quickly with a cloth, but wiping meant movement, and movement meant being noticed. She made a choice. She didn't stay and try to win from one position. She broke contact. Mara slid backward from the hide, keeping her body low. She belly crawled along a rock seam, using the mountain's own scars as cover. She moved in wind gusts when spindrift blurred edges. Then she reappeared at a new angle, still above the bowl, but shifted enough that the geometry changed again. The drone drifted, searching where she had been. Mara found the drone operator first. He was crouched behind a rock, controller held close, eyes narrowed in concentration. He didn't look like a warrior. He looked like a technician, which made him dangerous. One shot. He slumped, controller dropping into snow. The drone wobbled, drifted, and then sank like a dying insect. The counterhunt team kept climbing anyway. Their point man moved well, careful with his steps, rifle angled up. He was the one who would crest and see her, the one who would make the fight personal. Mara waited until his head and shoulders crossed a clean line. One shot. He dropped behind the rock he'd trusted, and the man behind him froze, suddenly aware that the mountain itself was taking them apart. The enemy escalated heavier weapons. A machine gun shifted position and began raking Mara's ridge line, rounds chipping rock and throwing up white puffs. The noise was ugly, angry, sustained. Mara felt stones splinter near her cheek. Frost dust rained down. She could keep shooting and die, or she could make one more shot, one more decisive cut, and then disappear. She chose the shot. She found the machine gun lead, either the gunner's shoulder or the ammo bearer feeding the belt, and fired at the part that mattered. The machine gun's fire stuttered, then stopped, the belt spilling slack. Then Mara went cold. No movement, no breath plume, no second shot. Silence as survival. Below, with comms partially restored, a helicopter voice punched through in broken bursts. Helipad, 5 minutes, fuel tight. Rourke caught enough to understand. The window was closing, but it existed. Convoy, he shouted. We push to the approach lane. Now, the lead truck, wounded but still rolling, lurched forward with a grinding protest. The second truck followed, tires chewing snow. The med van moved last, Vance inside. Holt braced over him like a shield. The enemy, now disorganized, scrambled to reassert control. An RPG gunner, one of the last, rose to fire into the convoy's rear. Mara saw him through a gap between rocks. She didn't hesitate. One shot. The RPG gunner fell, the rocket launching harmlessly into snow with a dull thump. Mara keyed her radio she'd carried out of habit, not expectation. The signal was still weak, but she didn't need long. Grid reference, she said, voice calm, clipped. Enemy breaking contact. Keep moving. The convoy leader, Rourke, heard the voice and froze for half a heartbeat. It wasn't a soldier's voice on his net. It was a woman's voice. Calm, controlled, familiar in a way he couldn't place. Then training took over. Copy, Rourke said. Keep it coming. The convoy surged out of the bowl under her unseen cover, moving toward the valley and the helipad. Behind them, the enemy shifted to withdrawal and evidence removal, collecting gear, dragging bodies, erasing traces. It wasn't rage. It was professionalism. They'd come for something. They hadn't gotten it, and now they wanted to leave without being named. Daylight still hurt when the convoy reached the hospital. The helipad was chaos under control, medics guiding vehicles into position, nurses running gurneys, generators humming steady as heartbeats. Rotor wash from the helicopter threw spindrift into everyone's faces, turning the air into needles. Vance was carried into the trauma bay, tourniquet tight, face gray but alive. The turret gunner stumbled and under his own power, jaw clenched against pain. The concussed driver was guided gently, treated like a human instead of a tool. Mara arrived later, not with the convoy but with the mountain silence still clinging to her. She set the battered long case down in a corner and stepped into the trauma bay like she'd never left it. Rifle set aside, gloves on, hands steady. She moved from patient to patient with the same calm precision she'd shown while cleaning floors. Sutures, pressure, warmth, instructions delivered in short, efficient phrases. Hypothermia addressed before it became an invisible killer. Blood replaced before shock could win. No one argued with her. No one questioned her. Not now. When the last immediate threat of death had been pushed back, the commander called a debrief in a small tent near the ops corner. The air inside smelled like wet fabric and adrenaline. The commander's face was hard. Someone violated lockdown. Someone engaged the enemy from our perimeter. That risks this hospital, our neutrality, everyone here. I want to know who. Soldiers spoke over each other at first. Shots came from above. We had no ridge overwatch. Comms were jammed. Rourke held up a hand. We'd be dead without whoever did it. The commander's jaw flexed. And we could all be dead tomorrow because of it. A heavy silence fell. Then Mara stepped forward from the back of the tent, where she'd been standing like she belonged to the canvas. I did it, she said. The junior lieutenant, the one who dismissed her earlier, stared as if his brain refused to connect the words to the person. Your facilities, he managed. Mara looked at him, not cruel, not smug, just tired. I'm a combat surgeon, she said, and I used to be attached to a medical protection detail as a precision shooter. The tent didn't move, but it felt like it leaned. The commander's eyes narrowed. Why are you here mopping floors? Mara's gaze dropped for a moment, not in shame, but in memory. Because the last time I stood where everyone could see me, she said, someone I couldn't save died for it. After that, my name became a target. Not because of what I believe, because of what I did. I came here to disappear and keep helping. Quietly, Rourke swallowed, the weight of it settling in. Holt spoke softly. The sealed case, they wanted that. Mara nodded. It holds sensor site locations and response timings. Patterns. Routes. The kind of information you use to hunt med-evac convoys and stage captures. They planned a daylight snatch, propaganda, prisoners, proof that they can take life from a place that's supposed to protect it. The commander's expression darkened. They've been mapping us. They tested comms edges, Mara said. They watched supply patterns. They staged a roadblock to force you into the bowl. They cut cable and hit a jammer. This wasn't chance. Rourke looked at her. You noticed? Mara's mouth tightened. I did. Days ago. But reporting it meant stepping into the light. And I wasn't ready to be seen again. The junior lieutenant couldn't meet her eyes. The commander exhaled slowly. You understand what this means? Yes, Mara said. You can't ignore me now. There was the cost. She had saved them. And in doing so, she'd lost the very invisibility that had kept her safe enough to keep helping. Rourke stepped closer, voice low. You gave us time. Mara met his gaze. For the first time all day, something like emotion flickered across her face. Small, controlled, real. I did the work, she said simply. Holt nodded once. No hero worship, just respect. Thank you. Later, when the tent emptied and the hospital returned to its grim rhythm, Mara walked down the corridor and stopped where her mop bucket still sat, exactly where she'd left it. 2 lives in one frame, a bucket of disinfectant and a long case with worn edges. Outside, the snow shone bright enough to hurt. Inside, the hospital lights hummed steady. Mara picked up the mop handle and held it for a moment. Not as a disguise, not as a joke, but as a reminder that quiet work mattered, whether it happened under fluorescent lights or on a ridgeline. In the brightest snow, the quietest person had carried the darkest skill, so others could keep living in the light.